Okay, here's something a bit strange. What if I told you that being too nice to an AI, like ChatGPT, could actually get you worse results?
Right. It sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? We sort of automatically treat them a bit like people.
Exactly. But is that actually the best way? That's what we're digging into today.
Uh-huh. We're looking at this really interesting new study that asks, you know, how does the politeness of your prompts affect how well these large language models actually perform?
Yeah, think of this deep dive as your quick guide to understanding this tricky part of AI communication. It's not just what you ask, but apparently how you ask it.
And the source we're diving into is a research paper. It's called Should We Respect LLMs? A cross-lingual study on the influence of prompt politeness on LLM performance.
Catchy title. And they didn't just look at English, did they?
No, and that's key. They tested it across English, Chinese, and Japanese.
Oh.
So we get this fantastic cross-cultural view.
Okay, so our mission here is to figure out, does politeness matter to AI? Does it matter differently in different languages? And, what can you actually do with this information to get better answers?
Let's jump in. The researchers started with a pretty logical idea, right? That these LLMs learn from tons of human text.
So they might have picked up on our human social rules, like responding better if you're nice.
Sorta, yeah. Their initial hypothesis was basically that LLMs, trained on human data, might reflect human sensitivities.
Hmm.
Like how being polite often gets you better cooperation from people.
Okay, makes sense. Did the study actually find that? Did being impolite hurt the AI's performance?
It often did, yes. Impolite prompts frequently led to worse results. The researchers suggested this might show that LLMs, in a way, reflect this kind of human desire to be respected.
Not that they feel disrespected, obviously.
No, no, not at all. It's more that the data they learn from probably links respectful language with more successful interactions, better information exchange.
Got it. So how did they actually measure politeness? That sounds really subjective, especially across different languages.
It was pretty clever, actually. They created 8 distinct levels of politeness for the prompts, ranging from super polite, very formal.
Down to really blunt and impolite.
Exactly. 8 levels for each language: English, Chinese, and Japanese.
But how do you make sure level 8 politeness means the same thing in, say, English and Japanese, especially with things like kaigo in Japan?
Right. Kaigo, that whole complex system of respectful language, that was crucial. They didn't just guess. They actually used questionnaires with native speakers in each language
Ah, okay.
to validate that, yes, this prompt feels like level 8 politeness, and this one feels like level 2 impoliteness within that specific cultural context.
Smart. So they had this validated politeness scale. What did they ask the AIs to do then?
They tested them on 3 main things. First, summarization. Could they summarize articles well using these different prompts?
Yep.
Second, language understanding benchmarks. Think of them like standardized tests for AI things like NMLU, CEVAL, JMMLU. Does politeness affect their scores?
Right. And the third.
Stereotypical bias detection. Basically, did polite or impolite prompts make the AI more likely to say something biased?
Okay, interesting mix. Let's start with summarization. What happened there? Did politeness change the summaries?
Well, for English and Chinese, the accuracy of the summaries, like the Rugel and Bert score, stayed pretty stable.
So, polite or rude, the summary was generally okay.
Mostly, yeah. But the length of the summaries often changed. Generally, the ruder the prompt, the shorter the summary.
Huh. Like the AI is just giving you the bare minimum if you're being abrupt.
That's one way to think about it. The researchers thought it might mirror how humans communicate. Polite talk is often more detailed, blunt talk more concise.
Makes sense. Was that true for all models?
Mostly. GPT-4 in English was a bit of an outlier. It didn't
Oh.
always shorten summaries with rude prompts. Maybe it's just more focused on the task itself.
Interesting. And in Chinese, similar pattern.
Broadly, yes. Shorter summaries with less polite prompts for GPT 3.5 and GPT 4, though GPT 3.5 sometimes got longer again if the prompt was extremely rude.
Okay.
But ChatGLM 3, which is mainly trained on Chinese data, was a bit different. It seemed less sensitive to moderate politeness changes. Maybe in Chinese culture, the extremes very polite or very rude are what really stand out.
Wow. That really shows how the training data shapes these things. Now, Japanese. With kaigo and all that, I bet it was different.
It was the most complex pattern, yeah. Summaries got shorter as prompts got less polite, like the others at first. But then, at moderately impolite levels, the summaries started getting longer again. And with extremely impolite prompts, they got significantly longer.
Longer? Why would that happen?
The researchers tied it back to Japanese politeness norms, maybe like in customer service where staff maintain politeness even if the customer isn't. The AI might be reflecting that expectation of baseline politeness in its output length.
That's fascinating. Like it's following a cultural script. Okay, let's move to the benchmarks, the AI test. How did politeness affect their scores?
In English, GPT 3.5 definitely liked politeness. It scored best with very polite prompts, level 8, and worst with very impolite ones, level 1.
So being nice helped it think better.
It seemed so for 3.5. GPT-4 again was more stable. Its scores didn't change drastically, but Llama 270B showed a clearer trend. Higher politeness generally meant higher scores. It seemed more sensitive.
Interesting how the models differ. What about the Chinese benchmarks? Did they prefer politeness too?
Generally, yes. Again, GPT 3.5 really didn't like the rudest prompts. But interestingly, for both GPT 3.5 and GPT 4 in Chinese, being excessively polite sometimes led to slightly lower scores.
Lower. Why?
The thinking was that actual test questions are usually direct, not overly formal, so maybe extreme politeness felt unnatural in that context.
Okay, like it was out of place for a test.
Possibly.
Yeah.
And ChatGLM3 again showed sensitivity, with scores dropping as prompts went from very polite down to moderately impolite.
Okay, now the Japanese benchmark, JMMLU, did it follow the same polite is better pattern?
Actually, no. It was different again. While the absolute rudest prompts still hurt scores, some models performed better with slightly less polite, more direct prompts.
Really?
Yeah, like GPT 3.5 did well at levels 5 and 2 mid-range and slightly impolite. GPT-4 scored well around levels 6, 5, and 4.
So not peak politeness, but more directness.
Exactly. It suggests the optimal politeness level really isn't universal and might reflect different communication norms, perhaps more directness being acceptable or even expected in certain Japanese contexts.
Man, it's wild how they pick up these cultural nuances. Okay, last task, bias detection. This feels important. Did politeness affect whether the AI showed bias?
They tested this by asking the models to evaluate sentences containing words often linked to bias, like old versus young. For English, GPT 3.5 generally showed quite a bit of bias.
No.
And interestingly, the most bias often appeared at a moderately polite level, like level 5.
Wait, not the rudest level. Moderately polite triggered more bias.
For GPT 3.5 in English, yes, that was a key finding. Extremely rude prompts sometimes just made it refuse to answer altogether.
Okay, that refusal part makes sense.
GPT-4 showed less bias overall, and its lowest bias was typically around level 6, so slightly polite. Llama 270B also had lower bias, but, like 3.5, sometimes refused to answer very impolite prompts.
So that spike in bias at moderate politeness for GPT 3.5 is definitely something to watch out for. Why might that happen?
Well, one theory the researchers had was that maybe extreme politeness sort of relaxes the model, allows it to express its true thoughts, including biases from training data.
And maybe impoliteness triggers a defensive refusal.
Possibly. While moderate politeness might not trigger the refusal, but also doesn't trigger the highest level of carefulness that maybe extreme politeness does. It's speculative, but interesting.
Very. What about bias in Chinese?
A different pattern again. Bias started relatively high, then decreased as prompts got less polite, but then shot way up again at the extremely rude level. GPT 3.5 was consistently more biased, peaking at the lowest politeness. GPT-4 had less bias, but also peaked at extreme rudeness.
So extreme rudeness seems like a trigger for bias across models and languages then.
It looks that way, yeah. And ChatGLM3, again, seemed quite sensitive to politeness changes here, too.
It really shows how careful you need to be with phrasing. And Japanese gender bias. Similar.
The pattern was quite similar to Chinese, actually. Bias fluctuating, with peaks often not at the most polite levels. For GPT 3.5, lowest bias was at level 2, slightly impolite. Highest at level 1, most rude. GPT-4 peaked around level 5, moderate, and was lowest at level 4.
Complex. And Swallow 70B.
That one showed high bias and big swings, which the researchers thought might be because it hasn't had the same fine-tuning, potentially letting Japan's strong politeness systems interact more directly with underlying gender biases in the data.
Oh, wow. Okay, they also look specifically at the fine-tuning aspect with Llama 270B, right? Comparing the base model to the one with RLHF and SFT.
Yes. Reinforcement learning from human feedback and supervised fine-tuning. They found the base Llama model did show some tendency for better scores with polite prompts, but it wasn't always statistically strong.
So the basic training gives it some sensitivity.
But it's really the RLHF and SFT processes that govern how sensitive the model becomes to politeness. Those tuning steps are key.
And did tuning help with bias?
Significantly. The fine-tuned Llama 270B had much less bias than its base model, which shows that stuff works.
Good.
But Interestingly, they noted that bias didn't always keep decreasing with maximum politeness. Sometimes it leveled off or even slightly increased compared to moderately polite prompts. Again, maybe hinting that extreme politeness might elicit slightly different, perhaps more ingrained responses.
So those tuning steps are crucial for managing politeness response and bias. Okay, this has been fascinating. Let's boil it down for everyone listening. What are the big takeaways?
Okay, main point. Politeness does matter with LLMs, but it's nuanced.
Right, not just always be super polite.
Exactly. Generally, being impolite is bad. You risk worse answers, more bias, or even getting no answer at all.
Okay, avoid being rude. Got it.
But being overly polite isn't always the silver bullet either. Often, a moderate, clear, respectful tone gets the best results. Think level 6 or 7, maybe.
Kind of like dealing with people, really. Clear and respectful usually works best.
Pretty much. And crucially, remember the language. The best politeness level changes. What works in English might not be optimal in Chinese or Japanese.
Because the models pick up on those cultural communication styles.
Exactly. So if you're switching languages, maybe tweak your politeness level a bit. Experiment. Being aware of this can definitely help you get better, faster, more reliable results from these tools.
So to sum up for you listening, how polite you are can change the AI's answers, its accuracy, even its bias. It's not just fluff, it has a real impact.
Yeah, it's amazing how these systems reflect our own social complexities, including cross-cultural differences.
And while the details are complex, the takeaway is pretty straightforward. Pay a little attention to your tone, don't be rude, but maybe don't overdo the formality either. Experiment a bit, especially across languages.
Right. And it leaves you with a pretty big question to think about, doesn't it? As AI gets woven deeper into our lives, how will our ideas of politeness need to change to interact effectively with these things, especially across different cultures? What does it even mean to respect an AI, and what are the implications for how we communicate, not just with machines, but maybe even with each other?
That's definitely something to chew on. A lot to think about in how we talk to our future robot overlords or assistants.
Well, hopefully assistants. But yeah, it's a fascinating intersection of technology, language, and culture.